These are all musicians.
About diversity among these gals. They're a pretty remarkable bunch. And this one right here is, she's Potawatomi Indian and Irish
Which one?
from Kansas City. This one right here in the middle with the curly hair. So, so there's a lot of diversity in the group. And they had difficulty in Europe, which we'll talk about. So, because of the one-drop rule, if she had not dyed her hair red, they probably would have not let her stay in the hotel.
Wow!
But with red hair, they just assumed she was Irish.
Wow.
Okay, so I will try to go through the PowerPoint presentation pretty quickly, so I'm not off camera all that time. But as some of you know, I've been researching Babe Egan since 1986, a very long time. And in 1986, I met several women who were in her band, who were then in their 80s. And they told me, you have to do some research on Babe Egan because she was just fabulous. And we played in her band and we have a lot of material for you. So they shared their scrapbooks and their photographs and memorabilia. And I interviewed several of them, some of them on video and some audio and some routinely on the telephone. And as they passed away, I've gotten to know their daughters. And that's been very interesting because the daughters knew that their mothers wanted the story told. So it's a difficult story because Babe, who's shown right here, can you see my pointer?
Yes.
That's Babe Egan. Her grandniece, well, her niece, I knew her in the 1980s. And every time I talked to her about Babe, she said, I'm writing a biography and I forbid you from writing anything about my Aunt Babe because I'm going to make a movie about her and I'm going to own everything. So just butt out. And I kept offering to go to her house and help her with her research. I said, I'd do anything, type, Xerox, file, whatever she needs. And she said, I'm working on it. Don't bother me. So when she passed away, I contacted her daughter and I said, so did your mother finish that biography? and the daughter said, my mother couldn't have even written a grocery list. I don't know why you think she had the ability to write a biography. And then the grandniece said, don't write about Babe because I don't want my children to know about her. And this grandniece had 9 children, and she's still alive and lives in Sylmar. And she didn't want me to do this research because Babe was a lesbian and an alcoholic and had a bad ending. And they're a staunch Catholic family, and they didn't want anybody to know about Aunt Babe. So this is my book on Peggy Gilbert and her all-girl band. And when I interviewed Peggy and wrote this book, Peggy said, if you really want to know about a great all-girl jazz band, you should research Babe Egan. And she gave me a couple manuscripts of people who had been in Babe's band, who wrote about their tours of Europe and in the United States. And I got those and used them in the research. So here's a picture of the band. So they started out 7 players, then at one point they were up to 12 or 13. They formed in 1925 and went on vaudeville. Their first big gig was going to Hawaii, and then they started touring. So Babe was born in 1897 in Seattle, and she accompanied Charlie Chaplin's silent movies when she was a teenager. And she played in an all-girl band at Fort Lewis to entertain the troops headed out to World War I. And there she met some musicians who came from Paramount Pictures, including a gentleman who was in charge of all the musicians who played on the silent film production sets. And he was a violinist. And he said, when the war's over, come to Hollywood and you can work with me at Paramount. So she moved to Hollywood in 1919 and accompanied silent film production at Paramount. 24, she started her band. 25, they went on tour. In 26, they started touring nationally. In 28, 29, they went to Europe on a 52-week contract. They recorded the first German talking picture for UFA, and they appear on camera and on the soundtrack for the first talking picture. And they toured 29-31 all over the United States. They recorded a Vitaphone short that's been lost for Warner Brothers. And in 32-33, they went back to Europe, and they ran into trouble with the Nazis. They had several girls in the band who were Jewish, one particular girl named Miriam Stiglitz, and they needed her, as I'll show you later, because she spoke German. And in Germany, Hitler was coming to power, and they had to speak German to the audience in order to get hired in German theaters and nightclubs. And a Nazi soldier became infatuated with Miriam and started to stalk her and demanded that she go out with him. And she refused, and he found out that she had family in Vienna because she went there on a weekend to visit them, and he sent people there, and she refused him again. So he threatened to take the aunt and uncle into custody. So Babe and the band smuggled the aunt and uncle and the clarinet player Miriam out of Europe through Italy and to the United States. And the girls came back to Hollywood from Germany, and they called a press conference in Hollywood, and they said, look, this Hitler guy is really a problem, and he's going to cause problems all over Europe and probably start a world war. And the Hollywood press corps told them, you girls just play jazz and don't worry your pretty little heads about this. The president will take care of it. And so they wouldn't write about what these girls witnessed and what they knew about the Nazis. So one of the things that the girls did was they brought back in their suitcases newspapers, pro-Nazi publication with lots of pictures of what the Nazis were doing and reports on their activities. And they brought them back in their suitcases, and they gave them to me in the 1980s, and they were in absolute pristine condition. And I put those newspapers at the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And they were thrilled to have them because they didn't have any newspaper propaganda from the Nazis that was in such perfect condition. And these women had held on to these for decades because they were witnesses to what was going on, and they wanted people to pay attention and listen. And so those papers are on display at the Holocaust Museum. So the band returned to the States in '33, and of course we had the Great Depression. Did I mention that Babe made $50,000 in 1929? She was the highest paid woman on vaudeville. That was a fortune. And she lived a very extravagant lifestyle when she was band leader, and she spent every penny that she made. So she had a rough time during the Great Depression. So while they were in Europe in 1933, they met up with an old friend of theirs, Thelma White, and Babe and Thelma became a couple and intimate friends. And Thelma decided that the band needed a singer to front the band. And so when they came back to the United States, they tried to tour with Thelma singing vocals, and it didn't work. And a lot of girls quit the band because they didn't like Thelma, and they didn't like having a girl singing up front in the band. So in '34, she and Thelma appeared in Broadway Melody Cruise. They tried this tour, and Thelma ditched the tour because she got offered a contract to perform on Broadway. So there was a lot of litigation. They moved to Hollywood and started managing the entertainment for the Club New Yorker on Hollywood Boulevard. They did odd jobs for many years. Thelma did films for RKO. She's most famous for that marijuana movie, that famous marijuana movie. She's the woman who was giving dope to kids. And that movie became a cult classic in the 1970s. Babe also took her girls on tour with Pito, who was a Spanish clown, and his sidekick Juanita. And in '39, Babe and Thelma go to Australia and start an all-girl band, also called the Hollywood Redheads. And they toured Australia, and they got on the boat owing a lot of money and were pursued because of the money they owed. And had a wild ride by a boat through back to London from Australia, and almost died. That boat later was blown up by the Germans in World War II. In the '40s, Babe was wardrobe mistress for RKO, though she didn't know how to sew on a button. And she died in it says 63 here, but that's not it. '63, she was poisoned by carbon monoxide in her house trailer in Palm Springs, ended up in Rock Haven Sanatorium in Montrose, California, and died in 1966. And so I produced an event in 1986 called the Tribute to the Pioneer Women Musicians of Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel. And a lot of Babe Egan's band members were there. So that's in a nutshell. Did I mention that she was a violinist? She played hot jazz fiddle, and she was classically trained, and as a teenager played in movie theaters accompanying silent movies in Seattle. In 1923, she appeared in The Covered Wagon. And this is Lois Wilson from The Covered Wagon. So has anybody heard about this film or ever seen The Covered Wagon? So the director is James Cruz, and James Cruz was Mormon and Ute Indian from Utah. And he had the idea of making this film about the Overland Trail. And he went to Mormon friends and family members and said he would pay $1 a day for every Mormon who came to be extras in the film. if they would bring their own wagons and wear their own costumes, and he wanted the men all to have beards. And so he got lots of them to show up with their own oxen and their horses, and he made this film, The Covered Wagon, which is a great classic in silent film history. Well, there's a story about Babe that the Indian chief who was involved in the production was a big jazz fan, and he often demanded that she play jazz for him at night. And whenever there was a problem with the Indians on the production, they would call Babe out to play jazz. And so it was reported in the press that she did that. So here's the cast. Here are friends of James Cruz. Here's Babe with her violin. This is the crew from Covered Wagon. These are the actors. And here she is in the film. She actually appears on camera. There she is playing a violin. And these two gentlemen were also silent film production musicians, not only at Paramount, but other studios in Hollywood. There she is.
Great shot.
So, so here's pictures from their Hawaiian tour. And that seemed to be every band from Hollywood got an offer to tour the Hawaiian Islands before they set out for Vaudeville. A lot of bands went there and just for 2 or 3 months got their act together and then came back and went out on Vaudeville. So here's Babe in the center here. This is Dot Sauter, the bass player in the band. Here's Babe down here.
Can you do that full screen?
It is full screen.
Oh, okay.
So here's Babe on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They played at the $1 Million Theater. And there's a great story about the band. There was a big fire on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. And Babe ran upstairs to their room and threw all their trunks with all their costumes and all their musical instruments out the window to save them. So Babe had several famous family members. Her father was a famous journalist in the Pacific Northwest. And this gentleman is her Uncle Martin Egan, who was a famous journalist. Her father and her uncle were friends of Jack London. And Jack London's book, Martin Eden, is written about Martin Egan's young days. And Babe knew about him, but did not meet him until her band played in New York City in 1928. And they became friends. And so he was the publicist for J.P. Morgan, and his papers are at the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York City, and it included a lot of information about Babe and her extended family. And someday I'd like to write a biography of him because he was absolutely extraordinary. And his first wife was a pioneer journalist who wrote a book on the ancient history of Iraq that was published in 1915 that's still considered the #1 history on ancient Iraqi history. So Babe, like many stars like Greta Garbo and others, bought chicken ranches in Van Nuys. If you can explain to me why, I would love to talk to you about that. I have no idea why these women had chicken ranches in Van Nuys, why they thought that was a good investment. But here's a picture of Estelle, one of the band members. Her parents run the chicken ranch while the girls are on tour. Here's another picture of the band in the late 20s. Of course, Babe in the center. So here's another picture of them, publicity shot.
How often did they record?
Well, we're not there yet. They didn't record very much. Okay, so that's a problem for that generation of women, you know. But here they are. They did uh, Europe and London. They went to Scotland. They played in Ireland. They played in Wales. So here they are at the Winter Garden in Berlin. This is a poster of the Winter Garden, but it's not them on stage, but that's what the Winter Garden was. That was the highlight of their European tour in '29. There they are. They had a bus for touring in California, their costumes. And here they are on the deck of a ship. There's Babe with the captain of the ship, and the girls in the band in the front row. So it's studying them, and I have about 800 stills now, 800 stills and images of the band, because I've been at this for a long time. And they were really brilliant with the marketing and the publicity. So here they are. This is Miriam. They're on a train in Europe. So I had access to these wonderful scrapbooks full of photos and memorabilia, business cards and luggage tags and bank receipts and all this stuff. A lot of fun stuff. Here's Thelma White, the singer and actress. So here's her memoir. Can you see this? Am I holding it up okay? So her memoir was called Thelma Who, Almost 100 Years of Showbiz. Well, there are several chapters in this book where she talks about Sherry Staten, S-T-A-T-E-N. And when I first read this, I thought, oh my goodness, she's not writing about Sherry Staten. This is about her years with Babe Egan. And so I started putting the dates and facts together, and it was opened up a lot of information about what Babe's life was like in the 30s. It's a pretty remarkable story, but the book is just full of lies. So this is what the band looked like in 1935 when they were touring with the Broadway Cruise tour, and later on when they were playing with the circus. Here they are with the circus. Pepito, Babe Egan. Here's her road show with Pepito. So, and she was in a Broadway musical with Thelma. Thelma was one of the stars in 1938, and Thelma wrote in her memoir that Babe was so fat and so ungainly that they dressed her like the Statue of Liberty and draped her with cloth and put her on the back of the stage, and because she was in such bad shape. Well, I found pictures from the production at the Billy Wilder collection, the Billy Rose collection at Lincoln Center, and that's Babe right there. Not fat and ungainly, and certainly not dressed like the Statue of Liberty standing on the back of the stage. So it started to clue me off into the fact that Thelma was just lying about their whole relationship and everything that happened. So now here's the remarkable story. Estelle Dilthey Homburg, who was the drummer in the band, had these recordings of the band. She had 10 recordings, and she loaned them to a gentleman who promised to transfer them to cassette so she could listen to them, because these are made in 1932 at the Sigler Cafe coffee house in Hamburg. And this gentleman never returned the recordings to her, and she died without ever being able to hear these. And they were made on her birthday in 1932. And every time I talked to her, she said, oh, I wish I could find those recordings. If you could hear the recordings, you'd know how great this band was. It's so terrible that I've lost them. It's just terrible. And a few years ago, a gentleman in San Francisco who's a friend of my friend Lance Bowling contacted me and said, I think I have some Babe Egan recordings. Would you like to listen to them? So I went to San Francisco and he played them for me. He transferred them and gave them to me. And so I can release a compact disc or digital album with the band playing from 1932. So in trying to research these recordings, I've been in touch with a number of German record collectors and experts on the recording industry in Germany. And they had the nerve to put on these online discussion lists that I couldn't possibly have any recordings from 1932 because, of course, they were all melted down by the Nazis to produce ammunition. So these couldn't possibly exist, and I was perpetuating a fraud. Well, unfortunately, these discs have deteriorated in the last couple of years since I got the transfer. And although Philip Johnson still has the discs, they're not playable anymore. So we got the last possible transfer out of them. Some of the girls in the band told me that they had these recordings, but they didn't know where they are. And I've had the daughters looking for them for years, and I can't find any other copies. So this is Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire about Thelma. This is the quote where she said that Babe was in that show, covered with drapery, playing the violin. None of it turned out to be true. Here's Babe and Thelma in the Club New Yorker in about 1933. It was not a good relationship. So when Babe died, one of her nieces buried her in San Gabriel at a cemetery with her brother who had died the year before. And there's no headstone there. And I've talked to the family trying to get their permission to put a headstone there with the names of the brother and sister, and to put Babe's name on there with a violin, and they won't let me do it. So that grandniece is in her early 90s, and I'm in touch with one of her sons. So maybe eventually I'll get a gravestone put there. So now I want to play just a little bit of music. I played some when we started here, but let's see.
I want to share the music player.
Yeah, just a second. I'm sorry, but I have to do this. There's too much going on. So I think I can play Minnie the Moocher.
Okay. You need to stop sharing unless...
I know. Just a second. I have to get back to the Zoom. Okay, well, I'll take any questions while I'm trying to figure this out. I can't get the Zoom set up.
You need to stop sharing and then reshare Windows Media.
If I could get the Zoom screen up, I could do that, David.
Mm-hmm. Click at the bottom of your screen and you'll find the Zoom icon there.
Okay, now I can see all of you and you can see me. That's good. Any questions about Babe? So here's the story. I wrote a book about her. I've been trying to get it published. Beverly Simmons could tell you all about it. She's one of my friends who's actually read it. It was 150,000 words. I found a publisher who's interested. They said it had to be 75,000 words. So it had to be cut in half, which is very painful to do that, but it's at the publisher now being considered, and I should hear pretty soon. if it doesn't get picked up, I will probably just publish it with a CD in the back and publish the whole 560-page book with all the photographs. But I hope they'll publish it and restore her to jazz history. So Ken Burns, when he did his Women in Jazz thing, he mentioned her, but he used a picture I had put on the internet about it, and certainly never contacted me for more information about her. She's mentioned in a couple other documentaries because she's in the Peggy Gilbert film that I made. And some people know about her, but when you go back to newspapers from the time, yeah, I have really literally 5,000 newspaper articles about her in the press. She was a superstar on vaudeville, and she was a household name. And so David, your question about the recording, when in the early days of radio, they started playing on radio to promote the vaudeville shows in the theaters. And I discovered that early radio stations were often in the same building and owned by the same people who owned the vaudeville theaters. So the top floor of the building where the theater was on the bottom floor, the top floor was a recording studio, and you can see the antenna, the transmitting tower. And I figured this out because I started looking at pictures of vaudeville theaters, and I'm seeing this transmitter tower on the top of the building. I said, wait a minute, how come all these transmitter towers are up there? And then I figured it out that early radio developed because they wanted to promote the vaudeville theaters and the silent movies and the shows that they were showing in the vaudeville theaters. And that's the whole history of the founding of radio in this country, which is nobody ever talks about that as a key part of radio history, because most of the people who do early radio history are concerned about the radio dramas. They're not really concerned about what else. And so the acts in the vaudeville theater would perform something, an interview on the radio station that got picked up by the local area, and they would make a pitch. We're playing 3 shows today. Please come on down to the theater. And Babe had a gag that every once in a while, when sales were lagging, that they would let all the redheaded girls in for free. Anybody with red hair could come for free. So let's see. So that's, you've heard the basic story about her. There's so many things to talk about, because her life intersected early silent movies, the early radio, vaudeville theater. I mean, she became famous just as vaudeville was on the decline. So, you know, the vaudeville theater was going down, but she was like one of the last acts that worked. And the reason they were so successful in vaudeville is that they were known as a flash act. And since they carried the whole show, the orchestra could take a break from the pit and go out on a break before they came back and accompanied the silent film that was going to be shown after the flash act and the vaudeville show ended. So they were very much in demand because they could play and keep the show going while the other musicians, the pit orchestra, could take a break and get ready for the silent film. So this was something that she came up with, and it worked very well for her for a long time. She did that because she had a pit orchestra at a theater in Hollywood for 3 months before they went to Hawaii. She had an all-girls band, not called the Redheads, they were called the Hollywood Studio Band, in a theater on Vermont Avenue. So she knew all about how that worked, and that was her secret to her success. Okay, so you think if I go to share, I should be able to play some music. Okay, share the screen, click on share audio. It's clicked, and here it is. And So these recordings are really old. I mean, if you can imagine, and they were pretty fragile when I got them. So I don't know how well they're going to be able to restore them. And there's still some tunes on here I have not been able to identify yet. So if you recognize something, speak up. So anybody knows Minnie the Moocher? You know what that song is reference to? We can talk about that in a minute if you want. So that's the applause from the number before. Can you hear it? The band is talking in German in unison to the audience.
Dear Miss Egan, we regret that the last day has finally come. The day you and your
So
beloved
that's the
girl
wrong track.
carry
I'm
your
going to move it forward a little bit here.
We hope you will always remember the month of November 1932 when you were here. Our thoughts will always be with you as you continue on your way to glory. Three cheers for Babe Egan and her ladies. Hooray! Hooray!
Auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiederhören in Hamburg.
Wiedersehen.
They had to play the Hamburg March in their show. I'm going to give you another one here because just so you hear a little bit.
That's really great. Like,
So you can tell that these recordings aren't just about the band. I mean, those aren't the best jazz numbers on this album. I'll play another one, but you get the whole nightclub scene, the audience, the MC, the crowd noise, you know, everything from that moment. And Hitler had just been elected, made the top guy just a week before this, or so this is a moment in history that's pretty remarkable, and that these American girls were there trying to make a life as musicians on tour. It's just pretty remarkable.
Where did they get their
style.
their arrangements?
So hold that for just a second here. Oh, that's my fault. Let me roll it back, because this is Babe playing the violin. So. Okay, so that's Joe Venuti, Wildcat. So she very much influenced by Joe Venuti.
Yeah, I was going to say that they could be in the same sentence.
Yeah. So Jeff, in answer to your question, Babe put on her on all of her shows that she was the arranger of all the tunes. But I have not been able to find any charts anywhere, and nobody's been able to show me any printed charts. But when I met Spud Murphy in Hollywood, he said, "Oh, I did Babe Egan's charts." Well, I looked at it. He was too young to do her charts for Europe, so he might have done them in the late 30s for her, but not the early charts. So I'm not sure, but she always told the audience in interviews that she did all the arrangements for the band. But the band members told me that they remember staying up all night, repeatedly copying out the parts for arrangements and to get them ready for their shows. And they all knew how to copy parts, and several of them had really fine music backgrounds, including the pianist, who also probably wrote a couple of songs and was a composer. So who knows? So I don't know. She said she did them, but I can't find them.
Thank you.
So any other questions? Hey, Ron. Ron's in Toronto. He knows about Babe. Hey, Ron. So anyway, is this completely nuts? It is nuts, huh? It's one of those things that it's like it just got in my mind to do this, and I thought it would be so easy, and it's just not easy. Researching women is really difficult stuff, because all these women married, changed their names, they had stage names, they divorced, they changed their names again. It's just really impossible to follow their careers. And then there were a whole bunch of women who were in the band for 2 months or 1 month or 6 months or something, who, you know, so it's been really difficult to find. And vaudeville history is, you think that the history of concert music from the 20th century is obscure. Researching anything about early jazz and vaudeville musicians is just impossible. The vaudeville archives all over this country are in terrible shape. And on the West Coast, I've been to San Diego, Santa Barbara, of course, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. I would say in all those libraries that if they had 100 programs from vaudeville, I would be surprised, all total. It's really hard to get your hands on a vaudeville program to actually see what was performed and who was on the lineup and all of this. It's very difficult, because that was just ephemeral, and 3 shows a day, people just tossed it out. And libraries have not been collecting vaudeville history. Though we would not have film history or television history without vaudeville. I mean, that's just the fact. There'd be no film industry, and there'd be no television without the history of vaudeville. So, and you can't really study those histories without knowing quite a bit about vaudeville, because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. So that's what I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. Anybody have questions or comments, anything to say? It's sort of funny. It's a funny thing.
It's a wonderful story and some great music. I'll buy the CD.
I'll probably give it away to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Fascinating. Well, so if you have any ideas for me, I'd appreciate it. It's tough going.
Thank you, Jeannie. It was great.
Well, thanks, Beverly. Beverly's my big supporter on this project. She really understands what I've been through trying to do it. Not easy. I don't know why I picked the hard subjects. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Jeannie, just publish it yourself. Then you can get all the facts out. These publishers that want to limit things are, you know, you get half the story and you've got the whole story. So publish it yourself and do it the way you want.
Yeah, I think generally I understand that. But the thing is, if you want to get a name into the canon, you have to play by the rules, at least, you know. So even if I get this university press to do it, then of course later on I'll publish the rest of it.
Yeah.
But you know, of course I had to have a history on early radio. For instance, did any of you know the reason they had trouble putting jazz on early radio was because they didn't have microphones that could handle the complexity of the sound of a saxophone.
Yeah.
So until they developed the technology that could contain the sax sound, they couldn't put jazz bands on the radio. But Babe, because she played violin, they could handle a violin. That worked very well on early radio. So she left the saxophone player at home or downstairs in the theater.
Now, saxophone style changed a lot between the teens, the 20s, and the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So that...
Right, but the sound didn't change. The sound of the instrument is always problematic in recording situations. It's still that case. You have to use very special mics to record saxophone and get the best sound out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's such a complex sound. So Richard, were you tapping your toe?
Yes. It's remarkable, Jeannie.
Well, it's crazy. So my next job will be to make a film. So I'm getting ready to work with those 800 images and get them prepared for a documentary. Because I have big plastic tubs full of material. So here's, can you see this? Like this, lots of stuff like this. And it, you know, and I have playbills and flyers and newspaper ads and all that stuff. And I think people really need to see the ephemeral because it's just really wonderful. It's a time that we think we know the 20s, but until you get there in the weeds with this material, you really don't understand the 20s. It's a very unique time in world history. People have no idea. And it was a very special time for women. That women did very well in the 20s. A lot of women, you know, men were traumatized by World War I. And a lot of women in the 20s said, we're not going to wait for a husband because there aren't any men who could be husbands and fathers. The chances of finding one, because so many of the men have been traumatized by the war, either emotionally traumatized, physically damaged, or both, or they were killed. So the women just said, you know, we're just, any day now, the whole world could blow up because of the shock of seeing bombs fly out of the bottoms of airplanes and blowing up buildings and killing people. This was stunning for everybody. They really didn't get over it. And so the women just said, you know what, we could die tomorrow. That's why there was a lot of drinking and drugging and sex and devil be damned. And it's quite a remarkable time. And a lot of women chose female partners because they gave up on ever finding a man. They just said, there aren't any men, so we can't not have sex. So let's see what happens here. And it's sort of funny because Babe wouldn't let the women have boyfriends with and go out on dates with stage door Johnnies, you know, fans of the show. So they paired up and were couples on the road. And some of these girls went on the road at 14 years old. And Babe promised that she'd give them an education on the road, pay them well so the family would be taken care of, and not allow them to fraternize with boys on the road. But I don't think she ever talked about what the other stuff that went on. And a lot of these girls, when they came home, they gave up their girlfriends and got married and had families. And this was the heyday of their life, and they never wanted to talk about the other stuff. But in their 80s, they were free enough to just sit down with me and tell me the whole truth and say, but you won't publish this, right? I don't want my kids to know. So it's a remarkable time, and there's nobody left who almost no one who has any memory of the 20s at all. So I feel very privileged to have known these women, and they entrusted their stories to me. So I haven't given up on getting it published and out there.
Well, she certainly deserves a place in the canon.
Now, a real character.
I'm going to ask my friend Andy if he knows about Babe Egan. Because if you know Jo Venuti, you should know Babe Egan, because she's just as much a pioneer as he was.
Yeah, and she was, yeah, there are a lot of great stories about her. I'm just giving you the short version, but when the book comes out, you'll all have to take a look. Or the film. We'll all go to the film premiere together.